of chroma. Open!
Hey everybody, Fox here. Well, we have some big news that just landed today, November 12th, 2025, and that is big news from Valve. There's a new line of hardware coming from everybody's favorite game storefront. That's right, Valve of Steam fame will be releasing not one, not two, not three new pieces of hardware, but, well, actually just three. They list the Steam Deck along in that announcement, but unless it's a Steam Deck 2, it's the same thing we've had before. So really, it's just three. Let's get into it.
Oh yeah, baby!
Let's hit on the most exciting one first, and that has to be the new Steam Machine. Well, if you were around back in 2018, which if you're watching this video, you probably were, you recall that there was a Steam Machine back then. In fact, there were Steam Machines, not just one. They weren't made specifically by Valve, they were third-party by Alienware, if I recall correctly, and they pretty much flopped. And the main reason for that was the fact that there weren't that many Linux games available on Steam. And in order to play games on your Steam Machine back in 2018, well, you needed to find a Linux version of the game. And like I said, most games on Steam didn't support Linux. So what's changed now? Have a bunch of developers created a bunch more Linux versions of games? Well, sort of, but not really. What's changed is Proton. If you don't know what Proton is, it came to fame through the Steam Deck. You see, if you don't know this already, the Steam Deck isn't running Windows. I mean, it can, but by default, it's running a variation of Linux, an alternative operating system. So if it doesn't run Windows, how can you play all of these Windows-based games on it? That's simple. Proton. Proton is not an emulator, as emulators run too slowly to play most games nowadays. Instead, it's a compatibility layer, which, to make a more complex thing very simple, it simply translates Windows API calls or calls to graphics, sound, and other components and tells them what to do. But in this case, it tells them to convert it over so that it will run on Linux. And it runs pretty much just as fast as you would expect it to run on Windows. In fact, sometimes it runs better on Steam Deck than it would on an equally powerful Windows machine. And the way that works is that we simply get Windows out of the way. Windows has long been a problem for gaming. Not only does it enable us to play our games, since most are available only on Windows, but it also gets in the way of us playing our games well. It often causes them to run poorly, crash, or have other issues. This Steam Machine will take care of the Windows problem, but allow us to continue to play our Windows-only games. When the original Steam Machines released back in 2018, there was no Proton, and so you could only play a select few games that were available on Steam. Most of the games on Steam were incompatible with the Steam Machine, and that was essentially the death knell for those machines at the time. Well, now we have Proton, which opens up nearly the entire Windows library of games. Not all of them. The older a game is, the more likely it is it may encounter some issues trying to run on a Steam Deck, or a desktop machine where someone sort of jerry-rigged a SteamOS style operating system onto it. And some newer games actually don't run through Proton because they use low-level anti-cheat software, which essentially detects that the Steam Deck, or in this case, really the SteamOS, is some sort of violation of their anti-cheat policy. I can tell you from my personal experience that I cannot recall a single game that I wanted to play on my Steam Deck that wouldn't actually run on it. A few of them I had to tinker with, but that was back in the early days of the Steam Deck, and now Proton has simply gotten better and better with each passing update. This new Steam Machine resembles a console in many ways, essentially being a cube that could easily sit in your entertainment center. You don't have to have a full-size desktop sitting there looking gaudy as hell. And although there have been small form factor PCs created by many different companies to try to give you that console-like look, none of them really had a console-like experience. And neither ultimately will the Steam Machine. It'll get much closer, but it's still a PC at heart, and you will still have to fiddle with configuration inside the game, such as modifying the graphics settings, possibly audio settings, and some other stuff, as you're able to do on a regular PC. This is great for those of us that love PC gaming, but it will mean that anyone that's jumping into this thinking they're going to get a console-level streamlined experience may find it a bit jarring, because they're going to have to get used to fiddling with some of the configuration settings inside the games, and hopefully not much else. While at times you may have to fiddle with something outside of the game to get it to properly work or work the way you want, in most cases you only have to adjust the settings in the game. Most games on consoles have few, if any, real settings to change regarding the graphics and performance, other than maybe just a way to change it from performance, balanced, and quality. But on PC, you've got a whole host of graphics options in most games, especially some of the bigger AAA titles, which can exceed a dozen, 24 or more settings, many of which most of those new people coming to this system will not understand. Onto the specs, this is actually nothing mind-blowing. It's not going to blow you away with its performance, but it is keeping itself well within the range where it might actually release for $400, possibly $500, depending on whether or not it comes with the new Steam controller, and we'll get to that later. It'll be running an AMD Zen 4 processor, 6 cores, 12 threads. It'll have 16 gigabytes of system RAM, and for the graphics processor, one of the most important components when it comes to gaming, it'll have what they're referring to as a semi-custom AMD RDNA 3, which is the equivalent of AMD's RX 7000 series. It'll likely be something between an RX 7600 and a 7400, since it has been somewhat customized. And I think most of this customization will be on a firmware and software level, more so than a hardware level. I highly doubt AMD created any sort of new RDNA 3 architecture specifically for the Steam machine. It'll have 28 compute units, if you know what that means, but the bigger deal here is actually going to be the VRAM. If you've been keeping up with the PC gaming space lately and the release of recent graphics cards in the last few years, you know that one of the biggest complaints is the number of graphics cards still being released with only 8 gigabytes of VRAM. While 8 gigabytes of RAM can work just fine for a lot of games, especially at 1080p or lower, though I doubt you'd want to go lower than 1080p nowadays, at 1440p and especially 4K, 8 gigabytes can leave you wanting for performance. In fact, some games simply won't run if you have 8 gigs or less of RAM. Although most will run, they'll just run not so well. Valve is advertising this system as being approximately 6 times more powerful than the Steam Deck, and I would say that's probably roughly accurate depending on how you're measuring it. I don't think they're trying to be dishonest here in any way, but depending on exactly how you measure a system's performance, it can vary. It looks like it'll come in 2 variants, a 512 gigabyte one or a 2 terabyte. That'll be internal memory, probably on some variation of the NVMe M.2 standard. Have Wi-Fi 6E, as well as Bluetooth, of course, we would expect that. It will also offer DisplayPort 1.4, HDMI 2.0. It'll have 2 USB 3 Type A front connectors and a micro SD card slot, which I don't know exactly what that's for. Maybe you could run some emulated games on that, maybe run some older games or 2D games on that, but for any modern, more intensive game, you probably wouldn't want to install it on the micro SD card slot. For rear I/O, it's going to have 2 USB 2 Type A, 1 USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C, and Ethernet 1 gigabits per second. As mentioned, we don't know exactly what the price is going to be, and that will depend heavily on whether or not they include one of the Steam controllers with it, and if Valve is willing to take a little bit of possibly a loss or sell it at market price. In the vast majority of cases, when a computer hardware manufacturer is selling you computer hardware, they actually have to make a profit on it because they're not going to make money any other way. Now, some of them may offer some sort of subscription service linked to that hardware, but generally speaking, that's extremely rare. So, in the case of consoles, they can sell you the console at cost or even below cost, taking a loss, in hopes of recuperating that lost value when you purchase software, namely games. You see, Sony, Nintendo, or Microsoft could sell you their console for less than it actually costs them to produce it, take a loss, and then recuperate that loss as you buy games and spend money in their ecosystem. That's really never been the case with PC hardware, and one of the reasons why PC hardware tends to be a little bit more expensive overall when putting together a system than buying a roughly equivalent console, although even that has not always been true. In this case, Valve has the opportunity here to sell this system cheaper than anyone else could do it, because they know they're getting you into their Steam ecosystem, and if you buy one of these and haven't had a PC gaming platform before, well, you're going to start buying stuff on Steam. And the more stuff you buy on Steam, the more money Valve will make. So they can afford, potentially, to take a loss on this and sell it at or below the cost that they spent making it. Since there's both a 512GB and 2TB model listed, we know that the 512GB will be cheaper than the 2TB. That just stands to reason. We could all assume they're going to be different prices. And to go along with the Steam Machine will be the brand new Steam controller. Now, they have released a Steam controller in the past, but it did essentially flop. While some people did like it, for the most part, people did not want to give it a chance because it only had one analog stick. They expected you'd use a sort of haptic touchpad in place of the right analog stick, and for most people, that was a no-go. The lack of a right analog stick pretty much sealed the Steam controller's fate, killed it outright, and it didn't really go anywhere. Well, now that problem is gone. The new Steam controller will feature 2 analog sticks, as you would expect for any modern game controller. It'll feature a D-pad, 4 basic face buttons, those 2 sort of alternate menu option buttons, as well as a couple other buttons on the front. But the real standout here is that they're bringing back those sort of haptic touchpads, and in this case, 1 below each of the analog sticks, giving you 2 in total. Not really sure how useful those are going to be in the big picture of things, since for the most part, I virtually never use those pads that are available on the Steam Deck. However, what this does mean is that you can use this in place of a regular controller and get that regular controller feel and responsiveness, not having to worry about the weirdness of the right analog stick being replaced with a haptic touchpad. The inclusions of these touchpads is ideally to make it possible to play games that don't offer gamepad support. Now, how well does that work? I really don't know, because I've never done it myself. Despite owning a Steam controller, I've never actually used those touchpads in a game that doesn't offer native gamepad support. For any of you that have, let me know what your experience was like down below in the comments section. The third new piece of hardware that Valve is going to come out with is one we've been hearing a little bit about, and it's one that I care nothing for, don't care about it at all. I do not think it's the future of games. I think it's a niche gimmick that ultimately will not catch on for mainstream video game usage, and that is, of course, Steam Frame, their Steam VR hardware. Virtual reality for use in gaming has a long and interesting history, but the short of it is basically that it never really catches on. There are a few games that are specifically made for VR, but other than that, there are just other games that allow you to use VR, but it doesn't add all that much to the experience. Requiring the purchase of additional and expensive hardware, as well as getting used to some slightly different controls, as well as having this big thing on your face covering your eyes, not allowing you to see what's around you, well, there are a lot of logistical issues there, and because of that, I do not believe VR is ever truly going to catch on for the mainstream gaming audience. I remember back, when was it, 2014 or 15, people kept oohing and eyeing over virtual reality because, yes, if you play a game made specifically for VR hardware and it's made well, it can be a really cool experience. Problem is that most games really aren't going to benefit from virtual reality hardware. And the thing is, like I said, there are all sorts of logistical issues. Most people won't buy the hardware, therefore, most developers are not going to make a game specifically limited to VR hardware that most of their consumers don't have and therefore aren't likely to buy the game for. So, Steam Frame, their virtual reality hardware, don't care, probably won't talk much about it after that. Now the big question is, do I think the Steam Machine has the potential to succeed this time around? And the answer to that is absolutely, it does. I'm not saying that it definitely will, but I'm absolutely certain it'll get a much better foothold into the gaming market than the original Steam machines did, because you have most of what's available on Steam, and really, the vast majority of every game that most gamers would have any interest in buying being compatible with Proton, and therefore compatible to play on the Steam machine. While it is much more powerful than the Steam Deck, and you would expect that since it's not a portable system, doesn't have its own screen, doesn't have its own built-in controls like a portable gaming system does, it is also not the most powerful thing. It's actually not incredibly powerful even compared to what's out there right now as far as consoles go. However, It will be powerful enough to give you 4K gaming in some games, especially if you're willing to drop below 60 frames a second, and potentially a pretty solid 1440p experience in a lot of games. The real question is, are current PC gamers going to opt for a Steam machine instead of either buying a new system or upgrading the system that they have now? And that's a question I don't know the answer to. For me, I think the answer is probably no. I definitely wouldn't want to degrade the experience I'm having on PC right now by buying this lower spec machine, but for many people who don't mind buying budget hardware, purchasing the Steam machine outright instead of piecing a system together themselves could potentially save them money and give them enough of the performance that they want to be worth it. Will the Steam controller catch on? Well, I think it definitely has the potential to do so. Not only does it offer you all the standard controls that you get on just about any other Xbox-style controller, you also get those neat little trackpads, which some people might want to play around with. After all, if there's a game that doesn't natively support gamepad, and you need to move a cursor around to interact with the game world, well, that just might be a much better option than trying to use some sort of gamepad emulation third-party tool, or trying to find a way to get your mouse and keyboard to comfortably work on the sofa. I've actually done a ton of mouse and keyboarding on the sofa, as my living room media machine is just a PC that I built, and it's just running Windows, so I control it with a mouse and keyboard. But I don't really play any games on it. So when I'm using a mouse and keyboard while on the sofa, I'm just browsing stuff on the internet, I'm on X, I'm basically watching something on YouTube, I'm not actually gaming. And the way I use my mouse and keyboard on the sofa, I definitely wouldn't want to game that way. The good news is that nowadays, most games that come out on PC are fully compatible with a gamepad or a controller, because they know that a lot of PC players do really prefer to use a gamepad. I know some die-hard PC enthusiasts insist that you gotta use a mouse and keyboard for everything, but I've never been that kind of PC gamer. Been a PC gamer for most of my life, ever since I can remember. Even when I was a little kid, my grandpa was showing me how to play games on a computer running DOS, so I'm very much used to it. But I also grew up using controllers. I started with the Atari 2600, and from there got an NES, which I absolutely loved. And I've played on just about every major console from that point forward. For me, it's not a matter of which one is better, gamepad versus mouse and keyboard, it's what kind of game am I going to be playing, and that, for the most part, determines whether I'll use a controller or mouse and keyboard. If I'm playing a first-person shooter, absolutely, mouse and keyboard. If I'm playing a game like Divinity Original Sin 2 or Baldur's Gate 3, definitely mouse and keyboard. And even for some third-person action games, I'll still prefer a mouse and keyboard if there's quite a lot of aiming required, such as in Horizon Zero Dawn. But for most third-person action games, such as Souls-likes, I'm definitely going to be using a gamepad. Will I be buying one of these new Steam controllers? Well, it depends on how much they charge and how I'm feeling in the moment. I might not, I'm not really sure at this point, but if I had to guess, I'd say that at some point here, I'll probably get one. Some other awesome news here that no one's really talking about is the fact that if Valve is releasing an official Steam machine, which will be a console-like experience, but it will be basically a desktop computer, well, what we can expect now is that there's going to be a variation of SteamOS that is not specifically designed just for the Steam Deck. Instead, it's likely that they'll release a version of SteamOS that is more customized for the desktop experience. I don't know this for sure, it's just my theory, but I don't think they're just going to use the variation of SteamOS that we have on the Steam Deck, because there are some differences in using a portable system versus using what is essentially a home console-like experience PC. Now, do I think that Valve should have included some more powerful hardware in this thing? Actually, that I'm not sure about, because the more powerful the hardware, the more expensive the machine is, and the less likely it is that people will buy it. The main complaint nowadays that we're hearing is that everything gaming related is becoming too expensive. PlayStations are too expensive, Xboxes are too expensive, PC graphics cards are too expensive, the Nintendo Switch 2 is too expensive, games are too expensive, everything is too expensive. So in an environment where gamers' main complaint as of late seems to be about the cost of everything just going up and up, I think it's likely that Valve made the right decision in making this a more budget-friendly machine. And if it is really their goal to get people into PC gaming that have not traditionally been PC gamers, then those people will have been gaming on consoles or portable devices, and therefore they're not expecting the latest and greatest hardware and the best visual experience that PC gaming can offer. So I think ultimately Valve probably made the right decision here. But I'd like to know what you guys think. Do you plan on picking up a Steam machine or a Steam controller or even the Steam Frame VR goggles after I just dissed them and told you how much I think it's pointless? But hey, you do you. If you like VR, then maybe Steam Frame is just up your alley. But let me know in the comment section below which ones you plan on picking up, or if you're going to stand by and wait to find out more information and see if it's right for you. I'm Fox with RealMarcFoxx. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, do all that jazz. You can join down below. There's a button just below the video, or you can join my Patreon and support me here in what I'm doing. A huge thank you and shout out to Patreon supporter Freeman Phil. Thanks again, everybody, and I'll see you next time.